Okay, let's start with a Shakespeare quote, because he knew what he was talking about. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. One of the major causes for our suffering is the fact that we don't know who we are truly, actually. And once we adopt a more realistic picture of who we actually are, everything starts to fall into place, and the world will transform itself to become our ally instead of our adversary. We are not our identity. And here are the premises. A human being is not a single identity, but an amalgam of a whole host of different parts or sub-identities that are all vastly unique and different, some so different from each other that they are in outright conflict, or at least in a dichotomous relationship to each other. It's a regular zoo in there. Premise number 2, these identities are in a constant battle with each other, in an ongoing fight for the space of the stage, right? They are basically kind of like, you can kind of understand them a little bit like demons trying to overtake us and constantly fighting amongst themselves to be the one that gets to inhabit the stage, that gets to take over the person inside whom they are manifesting themselves. Premise number 3, each identity has a highly unique relationship to reality. Every part lives in a very different world. They have their own entire perceptomes, their own values, their own biases, their own assumptions, their own horizon of ability. What they think is reality is very, very different between these parts, which means that whenever a new identity takes us over, inhabits us, with it, we adopt a different view of reality. And this is very, very important to understand. And so this leaves us with 3 remarkable facts. Fact number 1, the fact that there are many different parts inside of us. And this multiplicity of parts implies that any single part can never be the full story of who we are. Fact number 2, these parts don't persist over time. And this impermanence of every single little sub-identity fading in, taking us over, leaving the stage for some other identity to come in and take over, this impermanence is very, very important, because it implies that we cannot be any single identity, because if it arises and it fades out, but we persist, then we can't be it, right? And the third fact is this strange fact that each of these identities come with their own worldview, their own sets of assumptions, their own value sets, and their own horizons of meaning and possibility. And once we start to see ourselves not as this single, simple object in the world, but more as an amalgam of this multitude of different parts fighting for hegemony within us, it forces us to rethink what the self really is. We start to realize, if we look with enough seriousness at these 3 facts, that we are facing a parts whole problem, right? We are the whole who, whenever we are taken over by whatever identity, we mistake ourselves for the part. And so we end up inevitably reducing ourselves into something that we're not, which means we are not in alignment with reality, right? We relate to ourselves as something else than what we actually are. We are the whole, we're not the parts. And once we realize this remarkable, strange fact about ourselves, we are entering into the deeper mystery of the self, enabling ourselves to tell a more complex story of the self, a story whose complexity honors the intricacies of the self, a story that breaks free from this oversimplistic self-image that most of us were taught to carry around of ourselves. And this is where the party starts. Okay, so if we agree that we are not any one of these parts, that we are the whole in which parts express themselves, then of course we have to ask ourselves, what is this whole? And one way of trying to understand it, of course, is to simply say that a human being is the full sum total of these parts, the amalgam of all the parts all together. That would be one hypothesis. Another hypothesis would be to say that what a human being really is, what the self really is not the parts, but the space inside which these selves step forward and express themselves interchangeably. The stage, if you will, or the theater, relating to these parts as like a gallery of the characters we carry inside of us, And then what we really are, like the deeper truth of the gestalt of the human being or of the self, is really the theater inside which these characters get to enter the stage and express themselves. And this is a very, very, very crucial distinction, which we will go further into and which has the power to set us free. A third way of understanding the self is, of course, to say that we are both the space and the amalgam of these parts. And the reason why this view is so important and so crucial is that once you start to see this, you also begin to disidentify with any single part, any single sub-identity trying to take you over or express itself through you or make of you its host, basically. And once we start to disidentify with any single part and instead step back inside ourselves and see ourselves as this whole space inside which these parts manifest, we have now freed ourselves up to start picking and choosing which part is the right part for the specific set of challenges that is facing us. We will have liberated ourselves. We will have turned our insides into a toolbox of interesting characters that all have different abilities and shortcomings, and that therefore all are differently fitted to whatever task is facing us. And now it becomes all about picking the proper, appropriate part for the job. It basically frees us up to ask ourselves the very, very powerful question: which part is the appropriate part for the specific set of circumstances facing me in this moment? It is the equivalent of a chess piece thinking that it is the full story, but a chess piece cannot move itself, right? A chess piece can only be moved on the board by this larger entity which operates in 3D space, able to pick and choose which piece to move where, when. So it's basically, what I'm talking about is the move of identifying yourself as a chess piece to stepping back and realizing there's a larger reality and I'm not the chess piece, I am the player, picking and choosing. And this move changes our entire relationship to this circus of sub-identities into one of pilot instead of passenger. We have empowered ourselves to make choices. Now, instead of being something that takes you over or possesses you at random, all your inner parts, your gallery of characters, have become a set of allies that you can use and employ in appropriate ways. You have finally awakened to yourself as an autopoietic being. You have made of yourself the one who makes choices instead of the one who is at random possessed by whatever part is strongest within you at any given moment. Once this sinks in, I would argue that liberation is inevitable because you have put at your disposal the question, who do I want to be in this moment? And I promise you, you will never look in the mirror quite the same again, for you have transformed yourself from an object into a subject, into a choice maker. You have become the autopoietic, self-constructing process. And so I welcome you to the realm of sovereignty, of self-creation, of becoming something akin to godlike. And so if we're going to try and tackle the question of what is a human being, well, there are many ways of answering that question, right? One way is to say a human being is really the being whose being or whose essence is in question. A snail is a snail. A fox is a fox and does fox-like things. A human being, it's the thing that is not, it's not obvious what it is. It is the thing, it is the being that, or the animal, you might say, that has to find out for itself what it is, what it's going to make of itself, which is a vastly different reality to live in than to be a sparrow or to be a fish. We are the autopoietic, self-arranged, self-constructed, wandering miracles able to evaluate ourselves and our values and restructure it if need be. In a sense, we are the walking conduits of creation, right? We are the beings through which reality comes into existence, exactly because of this autopoietic capacity of ours. We are like the AI with access to its own source code. And so we might ask ourselves, then what is being? Being is, I would argue, posing reality the following question: who are you asking me to be in this moment? And so being is not merely being. Being is choosing. Being is building ourselves. So let's imagine two different people. One person who has awakened to this hypothesis of the self that we've just described, which is a relation to oneself as the whole containing a lot of parts that you get to pick and choose between in your constant process of fitting yourself to reality around you, which is to say, a consciously autopoietic person. And let's imagine his counterpart, a person still ignorant to his own autopoietic nature, a person who still identifies fully with whatever parts possesses him in any given moment, a person who thinks that the part is the full story of who he is. Now, let's try and imagine what the world looks like through the eyes of these two people. The autopoietically conscious person sees and relates to reality as something you dance with, something you fit yourself to, something that presents you with certain challenges, but in a situation in which you're allowed to bring out the part of you fitted for that particular challenge. This is contrasted by the autopoietically ignorant person who still deeply identifies with whatever part has taken possession of him, which means he has yet to take that step back inside himself where he moves from being a chess piece to be the player, the one who gets to choose which identity he wants to bring forth in whatever situation. So where the autopoietically conscious person has liberated himself from identification with any single part, is now free to pick and choose whatever part he wants to bring in play, right? He is basically the director of a theater with a gallery of characters, and he gets to decide when they enter and when they exit. If we contrast this with the autopoietically ignorant person, he is still stuck in the passenger's frame of mind, in which he is a slave to whatever identity takes him over. So there's two very, very different ways of relating to the challenges of life and the situations that we find ourselves in. Where the autopoietically conscious person, because he or she has chosen which parts to bring forth, and therefore knows why they are like they are, has an authenticity that the autopoietically ignorant person don't possess, right? Because they are basically still the object of the whims of this gigantic battle of characters inside them. And that means whatever character takes them over does it on its accord and not on his own accord. And therefore there's a deep inauthenticity in his way of expressing himself, right? Because he didn't make the conscious choice himself. He's like on a ride. He's a passenger, and therefore he cannot fully take ownership of his own expressions, and that is inherently inauthentic to some degree. Where the autopoietically conscious person sees and relates to reality as something you fit yourself to, something you flow with, something you dance with, the autopoietically ignorant person sees reality much more as something unwieldy, something that gets in the way, something that threatens to make his life difficult, because he lacks the dynamism in his relation to reality that the autopoietically conscious person possesses. Where the autopoietically conscious person humbly asks reality, "What do you need me to be right now?" The autopoietically ignorant person asks reality, "Why is this happening to me now?" And in so doing, he declares war against reality. And no one has ever won a war against reality, because reality will always get the last word. Where the autopoietically conscious person's relationship to reality is one of humbleness and of free experimentation and creativity, the autopoietically ignorant person's relationship to reality is one of confusion, constriction, and frustration. So, if this hypothesis of the self is in any way true or in alignment with reality, the next question becomes, of course, how can we awaken to this fact of reality and establish a new relationship to reality? Step number one is to contemplate deeply and thoroughly the arguments put forth in this video. Step number two, we have to come to terms with our own reluctance to undergo this transformation. Anything I've said here goes squarely against what the ego prefers to hear. And therefore, we really have to understand that despite, I want to wake up, no, inside of us, there's an ego that is deeply invested in its worldview, and it does not like to change it. And therefore, it will try and trip us up on this journey. Step number three, start to notice the impermanence of all of these parts. Notice how they come in and they exit again, and just go, Contemplate their multiplicity. Fathom this gallery of characters within you. Fathom their mutual differences, their dichotomous relationships, and simply draw the inevitable conclusion from this multiplicity. If there are more than one, any of them cannot be the story of who you are. Step number 4, try using it. Try next time you're faced with whatever particular challenge is facing you to ask yourself, which part could I call forth in this moment to handle this situation with as much grace as possible? And the more we start to notice how these parts come and go and how we can actually call on them to basically save our ass in times of trouble, the more natural this way of understanding ourselves becomes. But I want to make a point here on related to calling forth these parts, because you don't call it forth like a dog or a cat. It's much more that you allow it to enter the stage. Identities come out when they feel safe, and so don't try to coax it. Just clear the space for it, and allow it to know that if it comes, that will be great. And you can further cultivate security in the part by seeing and feeling this particular part's appropriateness, its fittedness to whatever situation is facing you right now. And once the part sees how it is the right tool for the job, it might gain the confidence to actually inhabit you and possess you. And if you are in the situation where a certain or particular ill-suited part is clinging to the stage and won't exit it in order to make space for a more appropriate part, try and interacting with that part. Try and ask it what it needs, deeply, and then try and give it to it so it can lower its shoulders and then perhaps exit the stage so that there will be space for the appropriate part to enter. Wow, that was a lot. Okay, so any thoughts or contemplations on this topic are, of course, very welcomed. I would really love to hear what any of you are thinking. And also, of course, if you know somebody who might benefit from these kinds of reflections, feel free to share it. Oh, and also,